Hello again. My name is John Schrock. I'm a chaplain with Harbor Light Hospice working out of the Mishawaka, Indiana office. I've appreciated the positive feedback I received after my first video I uploaded to our Harbor Light Facebook page, which had to do with grief in the time of a pandemic. I haven't gotten any pushback on using the word grief to describe what we might be feeling at this time. I wonder myself, though, if this is the most accurate word to say what we are feeling. But we are feeling things like anxiety, fear, and a general sense of unease. And I do think reflecting on the 5 stages or dimensions of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance, as relate to the COVID-19 pandemic, can be helpful. Today I want to reflect a bit more on how we respond to the feelings that we may be having at this time. Charles Dicken begins his classic book, A Tale of Two Cities, in this memorable way. He writes, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times." Dickens was describing how life in London and Paris was different, comparing how the citizens of these two cities experienced the same historical period in much different ways. Now, we could think about this in terms of how people in different places are experiencing the pandemic today. Say, comparing New York City, where things have been, it sounds like, truly horrific, to another American city, perhaps Columbus, Ohio, where the coronavirus's impact has been less devastating. For people in Columbus, Ohio, this has likely been experienced as a better time than it has been for the people in New York City. So how the pandemic is affecting you may be different based on where you live. The effect will also be different based on how you personally have been impacted. Obviously, if you or a loved one was one of the persons sickened by the virus in Columbus, Ohio, this will have had more of an impact on you than if you were living in New York City and have come through this time without you or anyone close to you getting sick. The effect of the pandemic is also obviously greater on those who have lost their jobs than on those who still have a job and an income. The latest number I saw was that as of yesterday, April 15th, 22 million Americans are now out of work. Those are unprecedented numbers that represent 22 million Americans, but also their families and those who are dependent on them, who have been impacted by this crisis in ways that are clearly potentially devastating for those who don't have income and don't have financial resources at this time. While the government is doing its best to help those who are out of work in this time of crisis, we are all going to need to be supportive of each other as the economic ramifications continue to unfold in all of our communities across the country and indeed around the world. So this may be the worst of times for many people. In the Indiana governor's news conference yesterday, it was mentioned that people with other health issues have not wanted to go to the hospital due to their fears about the coronavirus. And there have been reports of people dying at home due to heart attacks and other health issues, immediate health issues, that they chose not to have treated because of this fear. The message, of course, from the governor's office was not to do this. You still have to trust that emergency responders and hospitals are prepared to safely take care of those other health issues as they come up. As I am sharing this, I'm aware my aunt Margie, who lives in Oregon, is having an elective surgery, although it's not really elective. It's a hip replacement surgery that she hopes will address the tremendous pain she's been in for the last number of weeks. So there are, for people in physical need, still ways to get that treated. While this may be the worst of times for people with ongoing health issues, it also may be an especially difficult time for those with underlying mental and emotional health issues. Being emotionally and physically isolated can be challenging for those who need social interaction to keep them going. This can be especially true for people with a history of addictive behaviors. When I stated in my last video that some of the best advice I could give is to take things one day at a time, I'd kind of forgotten that this is one of the central concepts of 12-step programs like Alcoholics Anonymous. I was reminded that this was the case, though, a couple of days later when I was listening to an interview with a leader of 12-step programs who was sharing his concern for people with addiction issues in this time of enforced social isolation. While he said there are options like Zoom meetings for Alcoholics Anonymous at this time, he's afraid that many people won't take advantage of these resources and may fall back into patterns of addiction in these difficult times. So if you are someone who struggles with underlying mental or emotional health issues, I encourage you to find ways to get help before this crisis becomes one of the worst of times for you and for your loved ones as well, because you are unable to manage these issues. No, this is hard on all of us, this time is, and acknowledging that we need help to get us through is certainly okay and very honorable. Another way this can be a worst of time scenario is if there are relationship issues that surface when families are forced to spend much of their time together due to social distancing restrictions. Especially concerning are reports of domestic abuse increasing as families are stuck at home with each other. Again, if this is a problem for you, either as a victim or a perpetrator of domestic violence, I encourage you to look for help sooner rather than later, so that this does not become the worst of times for you and your family as a result of these issues. So clearly this could be the worst of times, but what about the best of times? How could this crisis be anything but a negative experience for anyone? Well, I recently read a book called Tribe on Becoming and Belonging. The book was written by a man named Sebastian Junger. Junger has served as a war correspondent in various places around the world, and he reflects on how combat veterans, when they return from a time of war, often find themselves, quote, missing the incredibly intimate bonds of platoon life, unquote. Junger notes how for many veterans, war feels better than peace, adversity can turn out to be a blessing, and disasters are sometimes remembered fondly. Why is this? Well, Junger's argument is that people in the United States and Western societies in general are already quite socially isolated and may not have a sense of connectedness or a sense of being a part of something larger than their own individual wants and desires. So that's why Junger calls his book Tribe. He says regaining a sense of connectedness, of being a part of a tribe to which we belong and for which we are willing to sacrifice some of our individual desires for the well-being of the group. This is important for what he calls our psychological survival. Junger indicates that this is why soldiers may look back fondly on their experience of being in foxholes with their brothers in arms. And I might note that Junger says this sense of camaraderie can be found not only in soldiers, but also he has seen it in civilians who have survived life in a war zone. For example, Junger writes about people who lived through the siege of Sarajevo during the Balkan War in the 1990s, and how people he knew at that time now look back on those days of living under siege with fondness because they felt so connected to those who lived through the siege with them. So perhaps some of us will look back at this time of the coronavirus as the best of times. Perhaps we will warmly remember getting to spend more time with family. Perhaps we will remember realizing our obsessive busyness may not be necessary, and our tendency to be addicted to our work that we have, I think, in our society is really not all that healthy. Another good story that I've heard recently is of a woman who left her home in the East to spend time with her aging parents in Texas who were experiencing health issues during this coronavirus crisis. While she certainly is experiencing this as a stressful time, she also talked about being able to hear news stories from her father about what it was like growing up on a ranch in Texas in the Depression era, and stories from his time serving in the military that he had not shared before. So while this may feel like a scary, worst of times moment for her and her family as she's going through it, I wonder if she won't look back on this time with her parents with great fondness in the coming years when her parents are no longer with her. Now, again, I don't want to minimize the trauma of this time for many people. This will be the worst of times for many, many people in our country and in our world, those people who have had some of the losses that I had talked about earlier. But those of us who have escaped from the worst of what the COVID-19 crisis has brought upon us can at least try to make it the best of times. There's a meme going around Facebook that I've posted to my personal page, and I'll try to upload it to the Harbor Light page as well. Perhaps you've seen it. It's a series of concentric circles starting with, who do I want to be during COVID-19? The first circle then is called the fear zone. This includes reactions like, I spread emotions related to fear and anger, and I grab food, toilet paper, and medications that I don't need. We've all seen people who have responded like this, right? The second circle is called the learning zone. It includes things like, I evaluate information before spreading something false. And again, I think false information is a real problem in this time. And other things like, I stop compulsively consuming what hurts me, whether that be food or news of the coronavirus. And then the third circle is identified as the growth zone. This includes, I think of others and see how to help them, and I try to keep a happy emotional state and spread hope rather than fear. I do think this meme is very helpful in this time. We are all going through an unprecedented crisis. We don't have much control over a lot of things at this point. But we do have some control over how we respond to this crisis. And our choices in this way make a big difference. So my message today is, let's try to make this the best of times, or at least let's try to make the best of these times. Let's try to keep a healthy emotional state, to spread hope where we can, to look after the needs of others, and to be appreciative of the blessings that we do have. So until next time, take care, be safe, and be blessed.